The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that makes your heart race. All eyes were on the elderly woman who was slowly making her way to the stand. Her every step echoed in the stillness, and at the center of the room, Judge Daniel Ferrer, with a skeptical and condescending gaze, watched her as she walked. There was an air of dismissal in his posture, as if he had already judged her before she even spoke a word. Voiceover. When this grandmother stepped into the courtroom, no one expected what was about to happen. But soon, the truth would change everything. Meet Doña Teresa Alvarez. She is a woman of modest appearance. Her face shows the years lived, her hands weathered by time and her hair graying with age. Yet there's something about her eyes. Those eyes carry a wisdom, a strength that most people would fail to notice at first glance. She doesn't look like someone who could command a courtroom, but appearances can be deceiving. Beneath her calm and humble exterior, Teresa is a force to be reckoned with. Teresa is not here by choice. She has been called to testify in a case, but what seems like a simple testimony is, in fact, a battle for justice. She's here to defend herself from an injustice that has threatened her reputation and peace. What the judge doesn't know is that Teresa is about to show everyone the true meaning of resilience and wisdom. The moment Teresa is called to testify, she is met with an immediate wave of skepticism from Judge Daniel Ferrer. His condescending tone and dismissive attitude seem to suggest that she doesn't belong here. But Teresa has come prepared, and she is determined to make her voice heard. This is more than just a legal battle. It's about standing up for herself and proving that wisdom and knowledge aren't defined by age. Don't miss this incredible story of justice and redemption. Stay tuned to see how this brave woman turns the tables in a way no one could have predicted. Subscribe to follow the outcome of this incredible case. The courtroom was packed, a blend of tension and curiosity filling the air. Teresa Alvarez was called to the stand. Slowly, she stood from her seat, her cane clicking lightly on the marble floor with each step. The audience shifted as they observed her move, some out of respect, others out of curiosity. She was elderly, yes, but there was something about her that made everyone stop and take a second glance. Judge Daniel Ferrer, sitting at the front of the room, looked at her with a dismissive air. He tapped his gavel lightly, signaling the start of her testimony, but his expression betrayed the underlying judgment. "Ma'am," the judge began, clearly annoyed, "are you sure you understand how this court works? Perhaps you'd prefer a different approach." Teresa paused for a moment, her hand resting on her cane. She glanced around the room, and despite the weight of the eyes on her, she stood tall. The judge's sarcasm hung in the air, but it didn't shake her. "Your Honor," Teresa said softly, but with a firmness that surprised everyone, "I understand perfectly. I only ask that I be given the chance to speak clearly." A murmur passed through the room. Teresa's calm demeanor was disarming. She wasn't here to argue with the judge. She was here to share the truth, and she was determined to do just that. Teresa settled into the witness chair, her eyes steady and focused. The prosecutor, a young man eager to prove his case, quickly launched into his line of questioning. "So, Ms. Alvarez," the prosecutor began, his voice dripping with skepticism, "you are telling us that you have knowledge of legal matters. How could someone of your age possibly understand the complexities of the law?" Judge Ferrer glanced over at Teresa with an almost smug expression, as if to confirm the prosecutor's doubts. His gaze seemed to say, "This woman clearly doesn't belong here." Teresa remained unruffled. "I've spent decades studying and teaching the law. The years I've lived have only deepened my understanding of it," she replied, her voice calm but unwavering. The prosecutor scoffed. "A retired law professor, is it?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "And you expect us to take your testimony seriously, despite your, well, let's say, advanced years?" The judge, who had been absent-mindedly tapping his pen on the desk, finally spoke up. "Ma'am, perhaps you'd like to reconsider your position here. Maybe the years have dulled your memory or your judgment. It's clear we are talking about legal matters far beyond your scope." His tone was condescending, as though he were speaking to a child. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Some of them could sense the subtle cruelty in his words, but Teresa's poise only grew stronger with each jab. "I ask for your patience, Your Honor. Please allow me to explain," she said, her tone respectful yet firm. There was no trace of defensiveness in her voice, only an invitation to be heard. The judge, irritated but willing to let her speak, waved a hand. "Proceed." Teresa took a deep breath and began to explain, her voice steady and precise. She wasn't just speaking for herself. She was defending a lifetime of hard-earned knowledge, and she was determined to make the court see it. Teresa's words flowed with surprising clarity. The courtroom, which had been filled with murmurs of doubt and mockery, began to fall silent. As she spoke, the atmosphere shifted. She was no longer just an elderly woman being belittled by a judge. She was a knowledgeable individual, weaving together the intricate aspects of the case with precision and authority. "Your Honor," she began with a calm but unwavering tone, "you have questions and I am here to answer them." Her voice was steady as she laid out the legal principles that were at the heart of the case. She referenced precedents, statutes, and legal terms that no one expected her to know, let alone speak about with such authority. The judge, initially dismissive, leaned forward, his earlier sarcasm fading into confusion. Teresa continued, "The law does not bend to age nor to appearance. It is a constant, impartial, and unwavering," she explained. "What I am about to share with you, Your Honor, are the very foundations upon which this case must stand." The judge, who had been making subtle comments of disbelief, now sat in silence, his hands resting on the desk. He looked down at his notes, avoiding eye contact with Teresa, unsure of how to counter her growing credibility. Teresa's calm was like a beacon amidst the tension. She wasn't in a rush, nor was she seeking approval. She simply wanted to make sure the truth was heard. The audience, which had been quiet in their skepticism, began to shift. Whispers of admiration spread through the room. Those who had once doubted Teresa's capacity now saw her in a new light. She wasn't just an elderly woman, she was a seasoned expert, and the courtroom was slowly recognizing it. As the defense attorney looked up from his papers, he gave Teresa a respectful nod. He could see what was happening. She was winning the room, one word at a time, and the judge, who had once assumed this case would be a simple affair, was now caught in the intricate web of Teresa's legal knowledge. The courtroom was tense, with every eye on Teresa, as she continued to speak with quiet authority. She had already demonstrated an unexpected depth of legal understanding, and the room was beginning to take notice. But just as the atmosphere seemed to tip in her favor, the defense attorney stood and made a critical decision that would change everything. "Your Honor," the defense attorney said, his voice carrying through the room, "there is something I believe you need to understand about this witness." The judge, who had been shifting in his seat uncomfortably, looked up with a raised eyebrow. "What is it?" he asked, his voice filled with impatience. The defense attorney turned to Teresa and then back to the judge. "Do you know who this woman is?" For the first time, the judge's expression faltered. There had been whispers in the room, some speculative, some incredulous, but no one had yet mentioned Teresa's full background. The defense attorney paused, allowing the moment to hang in the air. "Your Honor," the defense attorney continued, "this is Doña Teresa Alvarez, a retired law professor with decades of experience in legal studies. She has taught at the country's most prestigious universities, shaping the minds of countless future lawyers. She is not just any witness, she is a legal expert in her own right." A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. The judge blinked in disbelief. He had underestimated her, assuming her to be just another elderly woman without the capacity to understand or participate in such a complex case. But now the truth was clear. Teresa was far more than he had given her credit for. Teresa remained calm, as if nothing had changed. She was not seeking validation. She had been speaking the truth from the very beginning. But now the truth had been laid bare, and the judge's earlier mockery seemed all the more inappropriate. The murmur in the room grew louder, ripples of surprise spreading through the courtroom. Some spectators exchanged looks, while others whispered to one another, realizing just how wrong they had been about Teresa. As the judge looked at her again, his expression softened. He had no choice but to acknowledge the depth of her knowledge. The tension that had once clouded the room began to lift, replaced by an unspoken respect. Teresa had not only defended her integrity, she had exposed the truth in a way that no one could ignore. The revelation of Teresa's true identity sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Judge Ferrer, still processing the information, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The condescending air he had once carried now felt out of place, like an ill-fitting suit. His fingers drummed nervously on the desk as he glanced around the room, trying to regain control of the situation. Teresa, however, remained unshaken. She continued to speak calmly, her voice steady as if nothing had changed. But to the people in the room, everything had changed. The atmosphere was thick with a new kind of tension, one that was born from realization. The judge, who had once treated Teresa with such dismissive disdain, now found himself questioning his previous judgments. He avoided eye contact with her, instead flipping through his papers in a futile attempt to regain his earlier authority. But it was clear that the balance of power had shifted. The audience, which had been divided in their opinions of Teresa, now saw her in a new light. No longer just a frail old woman, she was an intellectual powerhouse, a legal expert, whose wisdom could not be overlooked. One by one, members of the jury exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from skepticism to respect. Even the prosecution, who had been so certain of their case, seemed uncertain now. Teresa's calmness and unwavering confidence were magnetic, and for the first time, the entire courtroom seemed to be on her side. As the prosecution struggled to counter her arguments, they seemed to grow more desperate. Their objections lacked conviction, and the judge, who had once been their staunchest ally, now appeared distracted, almost as though he were questioning his own position. He glanced at Teresa once more, his gaze lingering longer than it had before. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, his voice faltering slightly, "we cannot ignore the fact that—" But Teresa interrupted him, her tone as sharp and clear as ever. "The law does not bend to convenience, nor does it discriminate against age or appearance," she said. "It only seeks the truth, and the truth is what I am here to present." The words hung in the air, and the room fell into an almost reverent silence. It was no longer just a case of legal arguments. It had become something much larger, a lesson in respect, wisdom, and the power of knowledge. The judge, for the first time, sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Teresa's words had cut through the tension in the room, exposing the underlying biases that had governed the proceedings. And though he didn't say it aloud, it was clear to everyone in the courtroom. He had underestimated her, and now he had no choice but to recognize her authority. Teresa's calm yet powerful presence had shifted the dynamic in the courtroom entirely. As the judge and prosecutor sat in uneasy silence, it became clear that Teresa wasn't just defending herself in this case. She was teaching everyone in the room a profound lesson, a lesson that transcended the legal arguments at hand, one that challenged the very notion of respect and authority. With the attention of the room now fully on her, Teresa decided it was time to share more than just legal facts. She had already proven that she knew the law, but now it was time to remind everyone of the values that truly mattered in this moment. "I didn't always have this knowledge," she began, her voice soft but rich with experience. "There was a time when I was young, eager and determined to learn, but I faced many obstacles along the way. Being a woman in a field dominated by men, and later becoming a professor, I had to fight for every ounce of respect I earned. But over the years, I realized that the greatest strength comes not from power or authority, but from wisdom and the ability to persevere in the face of adversity." The courtroom was silent, each person hanging on her every word. Teresa's eyes, which had previously been calm and reserved, now glistened with the weight of the lessons she had learned throughout her life. "You see," she continued, "I was often underestimated because of my age, because of how I looked, but I learned early on that knowledge is not something to be measured by appearance or by years. It's something that grows and evolves through experience, through struggle and through dedication to truth." Judge Ferrer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, now fully aware of the depth of Teresa's message. The audience, who had once observed her with doubt, now listened with newfound respect. It was as if Teresa had peeled back the layers of preconceived notions and revealed the raw power of wisdom. She looked directly at the judge. Respect is not something that can be demanded through titles or age. It is earned through the ability to understand, to teach, and to stand firm in the face of adversity. "And I am here today not as a frail old woman, but as someone who has earned the right to speak, to be heard, and to be respected." There was a shift in the room. The judge, who had once dismissed her as inconsequential, was now grappling with the full weight of her words. It was no longer just about the case. It was about a deeper understanding of what truly mattered: integrity, knowledge, and respect. Teresa had taken a moment that could have been defined by condescension and turned it into an opportunity for enlightenment. In doing so, she had made an indelible impression on everyone present, proving that true authority does not come from force or titles, but from wisdom, earned over a lifetime. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted. What had once been a tense and combative environment was now filled with quiet anticipation. Teresa's words had left a lasting impact, and though the prosecution continued to argue, their voice lacked the same conviction it had earlier. The judge, now noticeably less arrogant, seemed to weigh each word carefully, as if measuring not only the legal points being made, but the lessons embedded in them. Teresa had not only dismantled the prosecutor's argument, but had also shown the courtroom that respect and knowledge could not be ignored. The audience was captivated, their respect for Teresa growing with every passing minute. The judge, still trying to retain some semblance of authority, leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Teresa. "I've heard your arguments, and I see your point," he said, his voice no longer dismissive but measured. "But the law must remain impartial. We must focus on the facts and the evidence presented." Teresa nodded, acknowledging his words, but her eyes told a different story, one of patience, understanding, and an unwavering commitment to justice. The prosecution, who had once been so confident, now seemed hesitant. They continued to push their case, but their arguments grew weaker with each rebuttal Teresa made. Her calm, collected manner and her impeccable knowledge of the law left them scrambling to make sense of their strategy. It was clear that they were no longer sure of how to counter her. As the minutes ticked by, a subtle shift took place in the room. The audience, which had once been silent, began to murmur amongst themselves. A quiet applause began to swell from the back of the room, first hesitant and then growing in volume. It was not loud or boisterous, but it was there, soft yet undeniable. People were beginning to appreciate the gravity of what was happening. Teresa wasn't just winning a case. She was changing the way the courtroom viewed her, and the way they viewed the value of experience and knowledge. The judge, still processing the arguments, glanced at the clock. "I will take this into consideration," he said, his voice finally free from the earlier skepticism. "We will reconvene in a moment to deliver a verdict." The room was silent once again, but this time it was a silence of respect. Teresa had not just survived the court's scrutiny, she had made the courtroom a place of learning, reflection, and growth. The prosecutor's earlier arrogance had faded, replaced with the recognition that the truth had been laid bare. The judge, though trying to maintain his role, couldn't ignore the shift that had occurred in the room. The tension that had once seemed oppressive now felt like a quiet storm waiting to settle. The outcome was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. The battle for justice had been far from one-sided, and Teresa had given everyone in the room something to think about. The courtroom waited in breathless anticipation. Judge Ferrer, who had once dismissed Teresa with a glance, now stood at his bench, contemplating the arguments that had unfolded before him. The case, which had seemed so straightforward at the outset, had evolved into something much larger, a struggle for justice, respect, and recognition of truth. Finally, the judge cleared his throat and spoke. "After careful consideration of the facts and arguments presented, I must acknowledge the gravity of what has transpired in this courtroom." His voice, though still firm, no longer carried the dismissiveness it had earlier. Instead, there was a weight to it, a recognition of his own earlier failure. The audience, sensing a change, leaned forward. The murmur of whispered conversations grew softer as all eyes turned to the judge. "Doña Teresa Alvarez," he continued, addressing her directly, "I must admit that I underestimated you. Your knowledge and composure have been nothing short of impressive. You have demonstrated not only the truth of your words, but the strength of your character." The room was silent. For a moment it seemed as if no one dared to breathe. Teresa, ever composed, met the judge's gaze. She said nothing, but in that quiet exchange, the years of hard work and respect she had earned in silence were validated. "With that said," Judge Ferrer went on, "I find that the prosecution's case lacks the merit it once appeared to have. The evidence presented is insufficient, and the arguments fail to meet the standard of proof required. I hereby rule in favor of the defense. The charges are dismissed." A wave of relief washed over Teresa, but it was not just a sense of personal vindication. She knew that this victory was bigger than herself. It was a testament to the value of wisdom, experience, and the power of standing firm in one's beliefs, no matter the odds. As the judge banged his gavel, signaling the end of the case, a quiet applause began to build. It started at the back of the room, hesitant and soft, but soon it grew louder. Teresa stood up, her posture dignified, and began walking toward the exit of the courtroom. The applause followed her, not out of mere politeness, but in genuine respect for what she had accomplished. Judge Ferrer, still seated at his bench, watched her leave the room. His gaze lingered for a moment longer than usual, as if he were reflecting on the profound lesson Teresa had taught him. In that moment, he knew he had witnessed something rare, a person who, despite being underestimated, had changed the very foundation of the courtroom with nothing more than her wisdom and grace. Outside the courthouse, Teresa stepped into the sunlight, her heart lighter than it had been when she entered. She had come to defend herself, but in doing so she had revealed the true power of knowledge and the importance of being heard. As she walked away, her back straight and her head held high, she knew that her victory was not just about winning a case. It was about reclaiming the respect that everyone deserves, regardless of their age, appearance, or circumstances. The courtroom had quieted again, but the tension was palpable. The victory was still fresh in the air, and yet there was still the final confrontation to be had. Judge Ferrer had already acknowledged his mistakes, and the case appeared to be swinging in Teresa's favor. But the prosecution, unwilling to accept their loss, was not ready to concede. As the defense attorney prepared to make closing remarks, the prosecutor stood abruptly, a determined look on his face. "Your Honor, if I may," he said, his voice more forceful than before. "I refuse to accept that we should dismiss this case simply because of a few legal arguments. The facts of the matter still stand." The judge, who had been allowing a certain level of leeway, raised his hand to silence the room. Teresa sat quietly watching. She had already said everything that needed to be said, but the prosecutor wasn't giving up without a fight. "Your Honor," the prosecutor continued, "while we acknowledge the witnesses," he hesitated. "Expertise, we must remember that the law is about more than just knowledge. It's about the application of that knowledge. How can we be certain that the legal nuances she's presented were not influenced by her personal bias? Her position here is suspicious at best." Judge Ferrer's eyes narrowed. The prosecutor's objections, once so confident, now felt more like a desperate attempt to salvage his case. Teresa, however, was unperturbed. She had endured worse challenges in her career and had seen firsthand how the pursuit of justice often involved more than just presenting facts. The prosecutor, sensing that his position was weakening, turned his attention back to Teresa. "You say you're an expert in law, but let's not forget your personal interests in this matter. Can we really trust the testimony of someone who stands to benefit from this case?" The audience gasped, but Teresa remained calm. She had anticipated this kind of attack, and it was not going to rattle her. With a quiet nod to her defense attorney, she stood. "I have not come here for personal gain," Teresa replied, her voice as steady as ever. "I came here because I was asked to speak the truth, and the truth, as I have shown you, is not influenced by one's personal interests. The law is blind to such things. I have only one interest: justice." The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. The prosecutor's attempt to cast doubt on her integrity had failed, and now, for the first time, it seemed as though the entire courtroom was aligned with Teresa. Judge Ferrer, though still in his authoritative position, no longer seemed convinced by the prosecutor's objections. He glanced at Teresa, his expression now one of genuine respect. "I believe we've heard enough," he said quietly, turning to the prosecutor. "The case is clear." For the first time in the trial, the judge's words were final. He was no longer engaged in a battle of egos. His focus had shifted to one thing: justice. The courtroom had settled into an unexpected stillness after the judge's statement. The tension, once thick and heavy, now felt like a mere echo in the background. Everyone in the room seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. Teresa had faced down the prosecutor's attacks and the judge's earlier dismissiveness, but now it seemed as though the tide had truly turned in her favor. However, the final battle was yet to be fought. Judge Ferrer, still holding his gavel, looked at the prosecutor one last time. "Your objections have been heard, but the case is clear," he repeated, his voice firmer now. "We will proceed with the verdict." At that moment, something remarkable happened. One of the key witnesses, a respected legal expert who had been called earlier in the trial, stood up and approached the bench. His presence was unexpected, but there was a sense of urgency in his stride. "Your Honor," the witness began, his voice calm but authoritative, "I have something to add that I believe changes the course of this case." The entire room turned to face him. The prosecutor, already on edge, appeared startled. The judge nodded for the witness to proceed, and Teresa, ever composed, waited patiently, though her heart quickened in anticipation. The witness looked directly at the judge, then turned to address the court. "I've reviewed all the details of this case, And I must say that Teresa Alvarez's legal analysis is, in fact, accurate. The evidence supports her testimony, and there is no doubt in my mind that her statements were not only truthful, but backed by sound legal precedent. In fact, I can confirm that her interpretation of the law is one I myself would have made. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The witness was no ordinary expert. He was a senior professor at the law school where Teresa had taught for decades. He had personally witnessed her lectures, admired her intellectual rigor, and had been one of the many students who had been shaped by her teachings. His words were not just supportive, they were a testament to Teresa's vast knowledge and standing in the legal community. The prosecutor, who had been so determined to discredit Teresa, seemed to falter in his position. His face turned pale, and he struggled to find words. The defense attorney, seeing the opportunity, stood and smiled briefly at the judge before turning to address the courtroom. "It is now clear that the prosecution's case has no merit," the defense attorney said confidently. "Teresa Alvarez has not only proven her expertise, but has also demonstrated the unwavering truth of her statements." The judge, who had been quietly listening to the exchange, gave a small nod of approval. "Thank you, Professor. Your input has been invaluable." The courtroom, which had been filled with skepticism just hours earlier, now seemed to breathe in unison, as if the collective recognition of Teresa's truth had shifted the atmosphere. The prosecution, now devoid of any strong argument, stood silently. There was no further rebuttal to be made. Judge Ferrer, no longer the dismissive figure from the start of the trial, glanced over at Teresa. "Doña Teresa," he said, "you have done more than present your case. You have shown us all what it means to uphold the law with integrity and wisdom. Your actions today have changed the course of this case, and they will resonate beyond these walls." The words, though simple, carried immense weight. The room was silent once again, not from tension, but from awe. Teresa's calm had not only won her case, but had also won the respect of those who had doubted her. The judge's final words echoed in the hearts of all present. Justice, it seems, is not just about the law. It is about understanding, experience, and the courage to stand firm in what is right. The moment had arrived, the verdict was in, and Teresa had won. The judge turned his gaze to the prosecutor. "I hereby dismiss the charges. The case is closed." The courtroom, which had once been a place of uncertainty and conflict, now felt like a space of collective release. The tension was gone, replaced by a sense of resolution. Teresa's victory was not just legal, it was a moral and intellectual triumph. The day after the verdict, the courthouse was buzzing with activity. The case of Doña Teresa Alvarez had become more than just a legal battle. It had become a story that would echo through the halls of justice for years to come. People from all walks of life had followed her testimony, and news outlets were already reporting on the unexpected turn of events. The elderly woman, once underestimated and dismissed, had become a symbol of resilience and intellectual strength. Teresa, however, was not one to seek the spotlight. She had never been interested in fame or public recognition. To her, the outcome of the case was a matter of personal justice, not a platform for celebration. Yet she could not help but notice the ripple effect her victory was creating. Everywhere she went, people recognized her, not for her age, but for her wisdom. The conversations that had once been filled with quiet doubt now shifted to admiration. At a small cafe near the courthouse, Teresa sat with a cup of tea, her hands resting on the delicate porcelain. She wasn't thinking about the public attention or the accolades. Instead, she reflected on the deeper lessons she had learned over the years. Knowledge and respect were the true currencies of power. As she sipped her tea, a young woman approached her, hesitantly at first. Teresa recognized her as one of the reporters who had covered the trial. She had been one of the few who had not seemed skeptical of Teresa's abilities from the start, but she had still been taken aback by the outcome. The reporter stood before Teresa, slightly out of breath, as if she had been chasing the story for hours. "Doña Teresa," the reporter began, her voice a mix of respect and curiosity, "I just wanted to say how incredible it was to watch your testimony. You've not only won the case, but you've also given us all a lesson in the power of knowledge and dignity. But I have to ask, what was it like for you in that courtroom, especially when the judge treated you with such disdain?" Teresa set down her cup, her fingers tracing the rim thoughtfully. She looked up at the reporter and smiled, a small but knowing smile that reflected the many years of experience behind her eyes. "You see," Teresa began slowly, "I have lived a long life, and I've had my fair share of challenges. People often believe that age brings frailty, but in my experience it is through the hardships we face that we learn what truly matters." In the courtroom, it wasn't about fighting the judge's disdain or the prosecutor's arguments. It was about standing firm in what I knew to be true. And when you do that, when you know the truth, there's no need for confrontation. The truth speaks for itself. The reporter nodded, taking in every word. She had expected an answer steeped in personal frustration or anger, but instead, Teresa had given her a response that was calm and introspective, as if she had anticipated such questions her entire life. It was clear to the reporter that Teresa's strength came from something deeper than the case at hand. It came from a lifetime of learning and an unshakable belief in the value of wisdom. Teresa continued, her voice still steady. "You must understand, it's easy to feel small when others try to belittle you, but what I've learned is that no one can take away what you know. Knowledge, once acquired, cannot be erased by insults or mockery. It stands on its own. And that, my dear, is the real power." The reporter, moved by the simplicity and depth of Teresa's words, took out her notepad ready to write down everything she had just heard. But before she could begin, Teresa raised a hand. "I don't need to be remembered," she said softly. "The truth will always find its way to the surface. The real question is, will we recognize it when it arrives?" The reporter hesitated for a moment before asking, "Do you think your victory in court will change anything? Will people begin to see others like you in a different light?" Teresa paused before answering. The question was a fair one, but it was one she had considered many times. "I hope so," she said finally. "I hope this case serves as a reminder that people are not defined by their age, their gender, or their appearance. People are defined by their actions, their wisdom, and their ability to stand for what is right. I don't expect the world to change overnight, but I do hope that in time we all learn to see each other for what we truly are." The reporter wrote down her words, but her mind was already racing. She had thought this would be just another story to cover, but now it had become something much deeper. Teresa's victory was not just about legal matters, it was about changing the way society viewed age, experience, and respect. Over the next few weeks, the story of Doña Teresa Alvarez spread far beyond the walls of the courthouse. Articles were written about her, interviews were conducted, and social media platforms buzzed with discussions of her remarkable journey. What began as a legal case had morphed into a movement of sorts, as people from all walks of life took to heart the lessons Teresa had imparted. In local schools, teachers began sharing her story with their students, not just as a case of legal victory, but as an example of perseverance and the value of learning. Universities reached out to her, inviting her to speak about the importance of lifelong learning and the power of knowledge. Young women, inspired by Teresa's calm and resolute demeanor, began to see themselves in her. They too could stand tall in a world that often underestimated them. The ripples of Teresa's actions were felt in the most unexpected places. Even in the corporate world, where power dynamics were often defined by youth and ambition, Teresa's story became a reminder that the true value of a person was not in their appearance or age, but in what they brought to the table: wisdom, experience, and a willingness to stand up for what was right. As Teresa looked out over the city from her small apartment window, she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The world had changed just a little because of her, because she had refused to be silenced. But even more important, she had inspired others to find their own voice and to stand firm in their own truths. And in the end, that was the legacy she wanted to leave behind. The case had been decided, but Teresa's journey didn't end in the courtroom. As she walked out of the courthouse, the sun seemed brighter, the air fresher. The battle she had fought was more than just about winning a case. It was about reclaiming her dignity, her respect, and her place in the world. Teresa had proven that age and appearance didn't define a person's worth. Wisdom and integrity did. The audience, who had once doubted her, now saw her as a symbol of resilience. The respect that had been denied to her for so long had been earned, not through force or power, but through knowledge, patience, and unwavering conviction. As Teresa made her way through the crowd, there were whispers of admiration, nods of recognition, and even a few respectful handshakes from people who had once treated her with disdain. The world had shifted just a little bit, and it had done so because of one woman who refused to be underestimated. Never underestimate someone based on their age or appearance, Teresa had said. Wisdom is a treasure measured not in years, but in knowledge and experience. Her words echoed in the minds of everyone present in that courtroom. What had seemed like an ordinary case had turned into a profound lesson about respect, the value of knowledge, and the importance of standing firm for what is right. Stories like this teach us that the truth always comes to light. Would you like to hear more impactful cases like this one? If this story inspired you, subscribe and turn on notifications for more tales of justice and redemption. You won't want to miss the next chapter.